internal medicine. I'm Brandon Savage. I'm an internal medicine physician by training and work across clinical informatics throughout CareEvolution. I work on a number of projects with U of M. And today, we're really going to focus on how to use CareEvolution for data management. Given that some of you may not be that familiar with MyDataHelps, I'm going to do a very brief overview of kind of the participant experience so you get an idea of the scope of what MyDataHelps does, but I'll spend very little time on that. And then the primary focus is going to be on how to access data that is generated within the platform and look at that from two different perspectives. The first is going to be using our exports and export access options, which is great for accessing data, the next day or the next week, and then also focusing on the APIs for real-time access that can be used to find out what's happening in the application right now, either for a targeted participant-facing step or even to build your own applications. So starting out with MyDataHelps, just from an overview perspective, it is a broad platform to manage distributed clinical trials from pretty much every perspective, whether it be from the upfront screening to kitting and fulfillment, to recruiting and enrollment, to managing the primary phase of the trial where you're gathering data from participants with surveys, ePros, ClinRos, and so forth. And then also connecting data from multiple different sources, whether it be EHRs, Fitbit, Apple Health, Garmin, and then keeping the participant engaged through notifications and so forth. So what does this look like? These are all screenshots of the participant experience for MyDataHelps. So starting here, there is a registration for MyDataHelps to participate and create an account. And then we have the ability to consent and enroll participants using multiple different methods. And this can be done in a very distributed fashion using QR codes. These QR codes can be placed on posters. Links can be included in email, and allows you to recruit and consent across large areas so that kind of the location does not become a barrier towards engagement. There are many, many different ways to collect data from participants, various forms of ePros. It's very flexible, from straightforward, simple surveys asking multiple choice questions to more complicated surveys that use graphical interactions, documenting on the body, documenting on images. So pretty much any method that you would like to capture data from a participant, you have the ability to do. In addition, you can connect to EHRs. This is a very robust way to get data, especially when you have participants who may not be at your institution. And so because of the Cures Act now, most major provider-based organizations do provide the ability for a patient to request their records. And using this methodology, MyDataHelps allows a participant to connect their records and then share their records with the study. So it allows broad data access. And we'll talk about what that looks like as we get into the core of the presentation. Not only does it provide that data to the study, but it also provides feedback of those results to the participant. You can see a simple sequence here where you can look up for a particular organization that participant may be in. They'll find their organization. Then they can link to their account. They provide access to their account. They sign in. This is through their patient portal, and then it connects their account to their MyDataHelps account. And then if you configure it, they can even see the results in addition to providing data to the study. Very similar, we can connect to most wearables. So, the most typical Fitbit, Garmin, Apple Health, Google Health. And so you can grab data, whether it be steps, resting heart rate, and then bring that into the experience of the participant. One of the ways that we drive engagement is by return of results. So you can see a lot of the previous screens were about capturing data from participants, but here you can see how we can give that information back. And it becomes a reason why participants tend to come back to the application. So taking a look, for example, at their steps and seeing that were recorded, you can look and see if the participant can see if they're achieving their goals. So let's say completing mood ratings, and they can even do comparisons. So seeing how their steps may vary based upon their mood in this example, as well as seeing bar charts of various data connected from their wearable. So a great way not only to collect data, but to provide value back to participants. This can become very rich. Like this is an example from our progress study that we did with Scripps, where we're able to even collect glucose data, and then a participant logs their meals and can see changes in glucose related to the different meals that they have logged. In addition to capturing results and providing feedback to participants, there's also a rich set of tools for providing notifications to individuals. It can be a simple notification like, did you fast last night, all the way up to things more complicated like ecologic momentary assessments that randomly ping a participant during the day to see how they're doing, or even JTIs, adaptive interactions through the day that might remind them to do something or take a particular activity, and they can become very rich ways of actively engaging a participant during a study. And finally, it's important also to note that we do support REDCap integration. So if you have a study that has a REDCap survey, that survey can be synchronized with MyDataHelps. And then using the MyDataHelps platform, you can deliver that REDCap survey as well as additional surveys from MyDataHelps, and then have that REDCap data synced back on that survey to REDCap. So it helps enable you to have hybrid studies between REDCap and MyDataHelps as well. So that's a very quick overview of what MyDataHelps supports kind of from a participant-facing experience. Really for this group though, I want to focus more on how do you get access to the data and configure the data and use MyDataHelps as a data management and data access tool.
Brandon, there's a couple of questions in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
I'm happy to read them because I know presenting you don't always see them.
Yes.
Are there any plans to add Samsung Health, or is it Amazfit? Those are.
Xiaomi.
Oh, go ahead, Gabrielle.
Oops. Just wondering about Samsung Health and Amazfit, which is a Xiaomi brand. They're both really, really popular outside the US, and they're starting to become more popular here as well.
Yeah, we have a roadmap. We're assessing other devices and technologies. And so although we don't now, as those become more prevalent, then we'll look at adding them. I am familiar with all of those as well. And definitely we are seeing increased uptake globally as well as in the US of those. They tend to have some different price points as well, which drive adoption.
Then my other question was, what CGM brands do you support? And are you connecting directly to the manufacturers or just going through Apple Health?
Yeah, currently Apple Health is the primary method to get access to CGM. We also are just about to launch the Dexcom integration as well. But when you get to, let's say, the Freestyle Libre, they have a proprietary connection that's challenging to connect to. They don't allow data out, as well as a number of the other vendors. Both the Dexcom and Stellos do also provide direct connections through Apple Health. So you are able to get data even without a direct connection to Dexcom or Stellos. And Stellos is the over-the-counter brand from Dexcom.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Great. I'll keep going. I'll try and pause for questions as well, because yeah, it is difficult for me to tell when presenting if there's something in the chat. So let's start out and just go over some configuration. So first of all, this is just a sample study, and looking at the various, configuring the different types of data available to a study, and obviously this becomes the data which you're then able to export. So there is a sensor and EHR data tab. In this, you can see by various different categories, Apple Health and Google Fit and Google Health. These are the kind of catch-all mechanisms to get many different sources of data, not just Apple or Google. So many different sources data will roll in here. And then additionally, Fitbit data, Garmin data, Omron, and you can see the others on here. And so from here, you determine what data you want to capture from a source. Given that there is a lot of sensor data, being targeted in what you choose is often helpful to prevent data overload. Once you ensure that you have the right data sources connected, then we can go into the export settings. And this is where you can configure the export, how the data is generated for exports. So both the frequency at which exports are generated, what data is included in the exports, and where those exports go. So you can see here, this is exported weekly on Sunday. Right now, if I wanted to, I could configure this to upload to an SFTP server or to an Amazon S3 bucket, and we'll take the configuration there. And then I can choose on here all of the different types of data which I want to export. All of this data then is available on a weekly or daily basis. And this export, not only does it send data to you, but it also generates something that we call the export database, which is used by the Export Explorer, which we're going to dig deeper to in the next couple of moments. The last thing I'll highlight here is this export history, which shows you every single one of the incremental exports that have been performed. And you can even download the exported data directly from this screen as well into a zip file. This would be for use cases where maybe you don't have the SFTP site set up or the Amazon S3, where you want to quickly take a look at data from a particular date. Some smaller studies tend not to necessarily configure SFTP or Amazon S3. Any questions on that screen or on kind of the configuration?
Question for S3, do you support only Amazon specifically or any S3 compatible services?
Right now, we only are supporting directly Amazon S3. We are looking at other mechanisms to connect as well, but right now it's Amazon S3 support only.
Okay.
One other thing that I want to mention is OMOP. If some of you may be familiar with it, but OMOP is a standardized format for EHR data. It is EHR data from many of these sources is exported in FHIR, which is very difficult for many organizations to consume. So we also exported in OMOP, which is a relational format, which also there are a number of tools by Odyssey, like Atlas and various other tools that allow you to directly view this data in the OMOP format. So we do have a few organizations already at U of M using this OMOP export as well. Just a quick link here. Everything I'm talking about with regard to the export configuration or to the Export Explorer, which I'm about to go into, here's a link to the help page within MyDataHelps. So now I'm going to go into more detail on the actual reporting. So shifting from the participant view and configuration to actually looking at reports that are available on the data. And I'm going to move through kind of increasing levels of sophistication and complexity. So the simplest way to take a look at data from a given study is with the reporting tab. The reporting tab is an easy graphical way to look at key statistics and information about a study without having to do any direct data queries. So right here, you can see I can take a look at a number of different reports. So here I'm looking at enrollment. So we can just take a look and you can see the cumulative enrollment through time, the newly enrolled participants and enrollment by month. I can take a look at something like SMS notifications, survey responses, kind of all of the key questions that you might have. And I can also filter this by particular groups. So it could be, people who are overdue for a given survey, or people who are on Fitbit or Garmin, or any particular type of subset that can be configured in what we call segments. And I'll briefly touch on segments a little bit later on. But this is a very easy to use tool to quickly get a handle on kind of the key statistics and information and trends within your study. So now moving into the Export Explorer. The Export Explorer is a database that you have access to that allows you to query those exports that we just finished configuring inside of the export settings. The Export Explorer allows you to query from SQL, but the good news is it also allows you to have a query library. So if there is, let's say, somebody on your team who's maybe a little bit more capable with SQL, they can configure some of these and share those results with, let's say, a coordinator, because some of these queries, often these queries get used for kind of within a trial questions that you might have. So for example, if we want to see the email events, I just clicked on the query library, email events, and then I can see run this query. So it automatically loaded this SQL. Then it gives me the results for the study. So I can see all of the emails that have been sent, all of the emails that have been clicked. And let's say a coordinator wants to take a look at this and say, okay, for a given participant, what has happened for them? So it's pretty straightforward for them to pick this query, modify it, and then put in the participant identifier. And this could be a GUID like this, or many projects define their own easier to read identifiers. And now the coordinator can see exactly how many emails were sent, open, delivered, and so forth. So it becomes a very flexible tool to get insight into the details of the database. This particular group is formatted on, this particular query is focused on what we call analytic events. Other things that you can get from analytic events is you could, for example, take a look at the trends over by month. So here we're just doing a group by, and we can see how many emails bounced, for example, in April and going back all through time. And I can dig in a little bit deeper and, let's say, look at the details of the bouncing. So now I'm looking at analytic events and then the email bounce event, and I'm trying to learn a little bit more about the bounce type. And now I can see here all of the email addresses that have bounced, whether they're a transient bounce or permanent bounce. And if I wanted to, for example, I could download these results and share, let's say, with another person in the team who might be following up, or I want to save the recent bounce events. So kind of what you can see I'm doing here is I can keep track of multiple queries at once. I haven't really had to write any SQL at this point. And I have this library, library of these different things that kind of different examples. And I'll give you a link to a query library that has all of these examples that I'm going through right now. This is a very common query. This is moving to another table called survey query results. In this case here, it kind of takes all of the survey answers and it gives me more human readable results. So now I can see, okay, this is the standard consent, the survey step, result step, the question text. the format, and what they answered. So it becomes a really easy way to take a look at these results. I might download those results, and then I could have a Excel sheet, for example, with all of the results. And just like the other examples, I can focus in on a particular survey time frame or a particular participant. Now I can see all of the results from that participant, or I can narrow down. Another good example here is HealthKit. So looking at wearable data. So here with this simple query here, can actually take a look at all of the data by model. So what did I get from iPhone? I can see each of the different types of data. What was the most recent and oldest data? I can see what came in from watches and what came in from other sources. So this also becomes a good way to query your wearable data. Another example here is activities. This is an example of aggregating data from multiple different wearables. So it's going to pull from Garmin, Fitbit, and from HealthKit. And now I can see the activities that got logged from all of the various sources. So not only do you have data from HealthKit, but you can, in a single query, start integrating data from multiple different wearables. EHR data is another source. So as I mentioned, with the Cures Act, participants are able to connect to their EHR. So here's a query that takes a look at that FHIR data that we're getting. This particular example is looking at diagnoses. You could change it to a different resource type like labs or procedures. Then running this query, it'll look at all of the EHR data. And in this particular case, it's giving me the top diagnoses currently in the study coming from the EHR. So you can see here the 202 participants have an infection of the eye. And you can just see all these different examples here. But similarly, you could look for procedures or any other type of data. And it's a good way to kind of keep track of, targeted information that's coming from the EHR. And then I believe there's one more. Medical record connections, looking at the connections from the EHR. So here you can see, I can take a look, from a particular participant identifier or date, but you can see by each source, how many connections how many participants connected. So most of them in this system are connecting to the demo sandbox. You can see the most recent connection was just a couple weeks ago, and it's been connected since 2021. It's another example of connecting and looking at the external accounts. This gives you an idea of, the ease of access without having to set up any kind of external tools. This is used for two common use cases. One, where you want a coordinator to be able to look at something that might help drive workflow, like looking for a very specific, bounced emails or looking for particular details on a certain survey that isn't easy to do somewhere else that maybe isn't built into the segments. Those are common cases. And with this ability to download results, sometimes when the primary team needs to take a look at data and maybe isn't ready to, go through the more traditional analytics. In addition, two other things to show you. One is all of the various data, all the tables are here. So you can look at, whatever data has been exported and get insight into the tables. But the last thing to highlight here is this query copilot. So there's a lot of folks who may not be comfortable writing SQL. We do have this beta query pilot where you can just put text into it, submit your question, and it will generate the actual SQL to answer that question. Takes a couple seconds to run through, depending upon how busy things are during the day. In this case here, we're just asking for something similar to what I showed before with the number of new EHR connections by month. Here it's generated the SQL. I'll run it. It also tells you what assumptions it made in order to generate this query. So similar to the one that I did earlier that was preloaded from the library, this is now telling you by month how many new connections were generated. It is important to, do some review of the data, as all of you probably know, when you're using these AI co-pilots, things are still getting optimized, we'll say, and improving with time. But this is a good way to open new queries and new ideas for generating queries of the data. Any questions on Export Explorer before I go into the next topic?
Question about Copilot. So when you use it,
Mm-hmm.
is it only sending you text to GPT or whatever backend you're using, and then that's generating the query, or is it sending data from your study?
Yeah. So it's not sending any data to the study. It's generating the query. So what it sends out is the query and the schema of the tables. It
Okay.
doesn't send out any data. And so at this point, all it's coming back is the SQL with no PHI ever being, going to the source. And then after I hit run, that's when it's running against the underlying data.
Okay.
Okay. So the next thing I'm going to go into here is how can you use this export database with external data sources? So you can go in and connect. This will tell you all of the details. I've got some screenshots here so we can, before I forget, here's a link when you review the video of the Explore the Query Library. This has examples of all of those queries I went through, so you can put them into your query library with explanations on how they work. So going through the details on connecting connecting external applications. So similar to the Export Explorer that we were just using, you can connect up to Export Explorer. So in this case here, we're connecting to, we'll set up an ODBC connection. So things like R and export and things like Power BI and Tableau all can connect to an ODBC connection. You will generate some temporary credentials. These have already expired. And then you'll follow the instructions in this page. It'll actually allow you to copy all of the key configurations. And then you can just paste those into the ODBC driver on your system. I know this is getting technical, but for those folks on the phone who are comfortable with ODBC, this is probably something you're familiar with. Once you take all of that information and copy it off that site and put it into your ODBC driver, you can go into your tool. This is an example of Power BI. You select ODBC, select the ODBC driver that you configured. Then right here in Power BI, for example, you can now see all of the tables that I was showing you in Export Explorer. And then inside of Power BI, you've got access to the table and you can start doing queries directly within Power BI or Tableau, directly connected to that export DB. So those will be updated at however the export database is configured, whether it be daily or weekly. Here's just another example of this configured to connect from dbeaver. So just another querying tool, just running a simple query against all participants and getting the results here. Any questions on reporting from the export database? Either the reporting tab, which is the direct visualizations, the Export Explorer that allows you to write a real-time SQL against the database, or use the Query Copilot, or finally, the external connections that I just went in through.
When I tried this a while back, I think the S3 key needed to be renewed every 24 hours or something like that. Is that still a limitation?
So that there are two different configurations on here. So what you're talking about is connect with an ODBC DSN. This needs to be refreshed every 12 hours. We now also support connecting with a service account. And this explains how to configure. And I'm actually going to go through this in a few minutes. This service account actually stays open for the duration of the project. You can set an expiration date if you want, but this will last, indefinitely. For all intents and purposes, you'll set an expiration date, but it can be months to years. And I'm actually going to go through an example using this key a little bit in the next section. Any other questions? Okay. So next is going into real-time data access. So everything that we went through so far in terms of accessing data is dependent upon that export database getting generated. So that export database will only have the data that you checked off, and it will only have data as recently as the last incremental build. So the last week or the last day, or if you aren't even telling it to build, it'll be empty. So it is important to configure that for the previous purposes. But in this case, there are use cases where you don't necessarily want to wait for that database. Those use cases may be you're building an application that needs to interact directly with the participant, something like sending out notifications or having your own visualization. So we'll take a look at some examples. The first example I'm going to look at doesn't require any programming. It's just with segments. So if you're familiar with MyDataHelps, you probably are familiar right now with segments. Segments are lists that are configured within the tool. And with these segments, they're based on various criteria. So for example, here, this is just a simple criteria that's looking for anybody who's connected via Garmin. I can configure the data that displays on this segment, and I can use this to get access to this real-time data, either for workflow here, or I can export this as a CSV. So right now, this is a real-time list. You can see if everybody who has an overdue survey, every Garmin connection, every Fitbit connection, patients with a recent glucose, all participants in the study. So this is one simple way to get access to real-time data. Is just directly within this tool without doing any kind of programming. So now getting more into the weeds, this is going to be the most kind of developer-oriented portion of today's presentation. We do have a separate website for developers. I'm going to be focusing on a few sections here. So this first section, I'm going to be talking about the JavaScript SDK with a brief overview and using it for web steps. And then I'll talk briefly about the REST API, and then we'll be ready for questions. So if we take a look here back to this Garmin list, I have an example here of the SDK. I'll click on it first, and I'll show you the underlying code. This is going through and it is grabbing from Apple Health and displaying the most recent glucose level recorded in Apple Health. So we'll go in and take a look at that survey. And this is a survey that also could be displayed to a participant. I'm just showing it here to the coordinator to make it easier to demo. So here is a web view step that I created that is using the SDK that provides access to all of the underlying data in MyDataHelps. And you can see here the configuration for that SDK. So this is typical JavaScript. What I'd highlight to you here is that this is automatically, if you do this partial HTML, automatically is importing the MyDataHelps APIs. And then you can see here that basically this is the query that it's calling, this query device data. It's passing these parameters. I'm getting Apple Health and blood glucose. And then I am getting the most recent blood glucose, the most recent point. And then I'm setting it equal to what this display is. So it's a very simple step here, and then it automatically puts the next button in. You can actually go in here. There is a Copilot as well, and I could say something like update this step to use daily steps instead. Send the instructions, and then it will go through, update this text to use steps instead of glucose from Apple Health. Similar to the other example, it does take a little bit of time, some time for this to go through. But now you can see it's going through, it's looking at Apple Health, getting steps, and it's changed all the text to be oriented towards steps. So this is a pretty robust tool, and this is a real-time access combining JavaScript with that SDK and a WebView step. Any questions before? Oh, actually, one more thing I wanted to show you, going back to here. These steps can get fairly complicated as well. So here's another example that's graphing all of the glucose values over 2 days and allowing you to compare. So you can get pretty robust using this type of a tool. Any questions on the Java SDK? Okay, so the last example is using the REST API. So it's another mechanism for grabbing data out of MyDataHelps in real time. So unlike what we're doing with the Export Explorer, I don't have to wait for data to be exported for me to get access to the data. So here I've got a program. Now we're looking at Python. And there is this quick start guide, which I think I'll pull up a link to it after this. You can see here's that segment that we were just looking at inside of MyDataHelps, that Garmin segment. And here is the code, and this code is shared on the link above, that allows you to connect with a private key that is that service account that I described earlier that allows you to get access for months to years rather than having to renew each each 12 hours. I run this query and it's just running through and it's getting the results in real time off of that Garmin segment. Here's the ID for that segment. It sees there's 2 participants on that list. I then ask it to display those participants here in Python. Here are the 2 participants. Asking it to give me the identifier for the top participant. And now I can query and get the survey answers for that participant. So this is more of a programmatic way of getting access. We've had organizations write their own applications, write their own services. A couple of pretty interesting approaches here are, let's say, having a external notification engine that is analyzing the results of surveys and then generating just-in-time adaptations based upon interacting with an AI engine as one group, or have other projects that analyze the exercise and then send out notifications based upon the analysis on the exercise. So this becomes a very rich way to interact with MyDataHelps from more of a programmatic perspective. So here's the link to the Quick Start app. So that code that I just displayed. And here you can see, if you were to click on Python here, it would bring you to the GitHub library where you could get access to that same code. And it starts out just by helping you query and get access to that participant list. So any questions on that last section around real-time access, Java SDK, and REST API? Okay. Well, that's covers the planned portion of the presentation. We have these resources. I'll leave this up. We have you can create your own account, of which I think many of you already know. There is our support email. There's the user guide, which covers pretty much everything in terms of using MyDataHelps. And then the last section on the SDKs would be in the developer center, using this link. There is also robust help within the tool with the designer assistant, and there is the community forum. We also have office hours on Tuesdays from 2 to 3. With that, I'll open it up to general questions.